So, have any of you guys ever had experience working in After Effects before, or?
By a show of hands, anybody's opened the program? I've opened the program. I've done it. A little bit. All right.
Cool. Does everyone know what After Effects is designed to do? Anyone tell me that? What After Effects is overall designed to do? The purpose of After Effects? Anyone?
Motion graphics.
Partially, yes. So it's basically just an effects program. It's very introductory, user-friendly, and it's made by Adobe, just like the entire Adobe suite. So we have it right here. So this is what it looks like when you open a brand new project. There's nothing in it whatsoever. And I'm just going to go over quickly the basic UI, so the basic layout of how this works. And raise your hand if you were at that Premiere demo that we did last time, or 2 times ago. All right, so this will make sense. Yeah. So a lot of the areas in the program are very similar to Premiere. Like they serve the same function. They just might be located in a different location. So to start, this is your project window right here. This is just like the media window in Premiere, where you bring in any kind of footage, like images, clips, sound, anything you want. It's going to come in here. So just by double-clicking inside, it'll open up your file finder. You'll find your files just like that, and they import it. And then I guess just going in a big loop here. So down below, you have your timeline, which is just like in Premiere, where you have the big timeline window with all your effects. That's where you're doing all of your actual editing in Premiere. It's the same thing as you're doing all of your editing here. So the effects kind of happen separate, but it still works the same thing as the timeline, just like any other linear editing layer-based program. And now, so just to be specific, because we were kind of talking about this earlier, this area right here is still considered, if you see this blue outline, everyone see that? The blue outline, that whatever you are clicked on, you'll see it jumps to that's your selection. So you actually have to select the area to work within it. So if you're having issues, that could be why. And also, this area is actually where the clips go. So can I import anything? Do you have anything ready?
Yeah. Is there a smoke graph? Yeah, just source right there, or assets, either one.
All right, so we'll just bring in a clip just to show you. So when you bring in a clip, just like I did, it'll show up right here. And in the same way in Premiere, you can make the bins, you can organize it in the same fashion as you should be, just as organized. But when you go to actually make a composition, and now a composition is basically just think of it as like a new painting or like a new canvas to work on. It's your new area, it's your new work area, your workspace. So by making a composition, one way to do it is by dragging footage into the timeline, anywhere in here, and you'll create a composition. So you'll see up here, and this is the viewer, just like in Premiere. Just like in Premiere, there's the two windows in Premiere, where there's like the preview, or what's actually the titles of it? It's basically the live view of what your actual timeline represents, and then the preview window where you can double click and see footage and clip cut down. In After Effects, there's only one window. You just have the main viewer.
You can go ahead.
Oh, it's not recording right now?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Good.
Sorry, me just is gonna change this now. Okay,
So instead of the 2 windows, you just have the 1 to work with. But with that, there's a lot of different ways you can look within it to kind of see what you want to see. So just to go quick through it again here, this is your timeline, but over here on the left, this is your timeline layers. So like it works just like a layer-based editor, like Photoshop, where you have one on top of another on top of another. That's what's going to show up. But it's still a part of the timeline. It doesn't have a specific name. But this is where your layers will show up when you bring them into your composition. And then this tab right here, you'll see if you made a new composition, this button. You'll see this is how you go in between your compositions. So that works just like any other tabbing mechanism. And as you work your way on this side of the screen, you'll see effects and presets, which just like Premiere, it has effects and presets for transitions, audio, and visual effects, but this is much more heavily computer generation heavy, I guess. That's what I say. It's bigger effects that take more time takes more processing power, it takes more software power stuff. And also if you get plugins, you will see them appear in there. So a plugin is when you install third-party software from online or wherever you get it, and it shows up and can work within Adobe After Effects. So,
Just a quick question. Did you switch your workspace into standard?
it may be, yes.
I was just wondering because it's how it's set up.
Yeah. So, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Just sometimes when you start out, you have like essentials or default layout, and that can be missing stuff like the playhead. So switching over to standard is.
So what he's talking about here is up here you'll see default, standard, small screen, libraries, these arrows, all these other ones. It's just like in Premiere where you have all the different, I guess they're called just tabs to look at. It's a different configuration. It's not actually changing much. It's just how you like to have it organized. So if you actually want to reset your workspace, you go to Window, Workspace, and you'll see all the different panels that you actually can access. But this was set to standard, which is, I want to say, is it the pre?
That's not default, and I think it's because I've been using.
Oh, okay.
tab.
So then if we just go back to default, I guess, or yeah, be able to see, it just kind of jumps back to the default configuration when you open up Premiere. And
I
then
think standard's more useful.
it's fair. So yeah,
And-
it's the complete thing.
And those workspaces, they're kind of independent, so you can kind of develop them customly. You can kind of build your own, like however you put your panels together, you can then save them as your own workspace, call them whatever you want to. So it's just kind of like a tab system, make it a little bit easier to
Yeah,
jump between.
It's all customizable, as in as soon as you click on something that turns blue, you can drag it anywhere you'd like. You'll see that you have the different locations just by dragging it around. I can go on the side there and put it over here if I want it. I can put it anywhere I want, and then save that workspace in the same location. It'd be save changes. But for now, we'll just reset to default layout. Or back to this. So continuing going around, really on this, you'll see under window, these are all the different actual windows that you can have in After Effects, but there's only certain ones that are set for the default and for viewing. Just like how in color you only see the color effects, just like in titles you only see the essential graphics in there. It's all representative of where it belongs. And going along quickly, so we have all these different tools right here. You can see, does anyone have any question on anything right off the bat? Just like keeping it open, keeping it light. Good? All right, so I'm not going through really much else besides what you see here. These are just all different tabs that have to do with exactly what they're called. Audio, preview, this has to do with
RAM preview.
RAM
and,
preview.
like, running things.
yeah, so RAM preview. Does anyone know what RAM preview or rendering or anything like that? Can you tell me what that is?
Johnson, what's it mean to render?
Means a pain in the ass for animators.
If
Like making it smaller and is it converting it to something that we can
Kind of.
look at?
Anyone else?
One way of saying it is kind of like you're making the calculations or finalizing calculations. So you kind of you take whatever you've already put together, you take all your equations, all the effects, and you flatten it down more or less, and kind of give a preview of what it looks like before you do a final export or a final render of it.
Yeah.
Similar idea.
Yeah, so you're seeing the actual live playback of that versus
Or as close to live as your
yeah, it's close to live as it'll let you. Yeah, you'll notice the more and more heavy effects you do, the longer it'll take your computer to render. And that's all it is.
So the RAM preview part of that, RAM is random access memory in your computer. It's your computer's memory, and so the more RAM you have in your computer, the quicker you'll be able to like, load those previews and run and see the effects and changes you're making. So
That's what they go.
Yeah, that makes it a more powerful computer, more powerful device. But the basic idea with RAM preview, one tip I wanted to share was, so you'll notice that when I press, so if I just press play on the clip,
base is that
you'll see it playing.
There's
It's not
that.
necessarily
There's
full
just-
frame, full speed, just because you'll notice the green. So that actually means it is like a pre-render. It means it's like a full, the highest quality that After Effects can allow it to be without being a final render is the best way of looking at it. So this will play
It's just
as close to
just
real speed
so-
as it can get it. Whereas if you see there's nothing there, or if it's yellow, or if it's red, it means that it needs to render, and it's not going to play it in the live playback. So, so last thing was, so you'll see, yeah, we don't have to worry about that. That's good. So that was in preview. Effects presets, align stuff, just like Photoshop and Illustrator if you're familiar. And yeah, I'm not going through the tools. So that was just a basic workflow of, not the workflow, the basic layout of After Effects. And does that make sense? So it's kind of very similar to Premiere. Adobe really wants to make it, I think, as accessible to students and people learning quickly, so they keep all the stuff very similar between their products, and there's just slight variations depending on what your task and goal is. Now, Jeremy and Dave are going to go a little more.
Cool, thank you, Nico. So let's go ahead and start designing a lower third. Like last week, we were talking about doing a lower third, and we did it in Photoshop real quick, and we just made this quick and dirty kind of version, and we threw it into Premiere, and we said, great, we got something. So let's make it actually move a little bit this time. Let's do a little bit of animation on top of it. So let's talk about some motion graphics in particular. Now, motion graphics, there's two words there, motion and graphics. I'll have our friend David here. He'll do all the motion side, and I'll start with the graphics. So first thing that I'll mention is the shape layer tool. So we have this layer here. This one's a video layer. We've seen that. We can scrub through that. That works just like normal. But if I come up here and I go to Layer, New, there's many different to choose from. One of the ones that we'll use is called Shape Layer. There's other ones we can get into more detail. If anybody has questions with those, we can find time for that. So Shape Layer. What a Shape Layer is, the best way that I think about it is that it's kind of like a folder, and within that folder you can put a lot of different vector objects. Now, does anyone know what a vector object is? Who remembers what a vector versus a raster object is?
The vector's like when you like zoom in, like it's like a formula to kind of like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's like it doesn't pixelate.
It doesn't pixelate, right?
Yeah.
So there's no jaggies to it. It's a mathematical expression for whatever that is. So a shape layer lets us draw vectors in Photoshop. I'm sorry, this is After Effects. So if I'm going to start drawing shapes, what I can do is I can change my tool. So I've got this rectangle selection, right? And I can draw this here. And you'll see that down below, the shape has updated with the new component to it. And I can keep adding more and more components, and you'll see that they'll continue to add into the shape layer. It doesn't make separate layers, but I can reorder these and put whoever I want on top or on the bottom, right? Within the shape layer. So for example, if I were to take this rectangle here, and I twirl that open, there's a fill color to it. We can actually change this fill color to something else. We can see that that one is the one that's on top, this rectangle 2. And if I move that below rectangle 1, it changes it just like that, right? So what I want to do is I want to try to design a lower third that kind of looks like smoke, so that we can take the rocket ship that we had designed earlier, and we can kind of animate that on and put some smoke there as it goes through, as it goes by, right? So let's start by creating a couple circles to start this off. Am I going too fast? Is anyone getting lost here? So I'll start by drawing a couple circles, and I'll use those key commands we were talking about earlier, where we were using like the shift key to make it exact, and we were using the space bar to move it around. Come back. Move it over here.
The funny thing about space. The funny thing about space.
Stop.
Think about
Stop.
Think about space.
Stop. So just kind of designing it a little bit, and then I'll take each of these components and I'll move them around a little bit. Something like this. And what I'm doing is I'm holding the Option button to duplicate the shape. So if I hold the Option button and drag, I can drag that one out and make a new shape with it. So here we go. We're kind of making this shape. And what's really nice is that because these are all very similar, at least in their color, if I click off of them, it looks like one shape, more or less. So we can put that in with our text on top of it, and get ourselves a nice looking lower third that kind of has this texture to it. It's not just a regular circle or a regular rectangle like we had last week. So, David, what do you think? Is that long enough?
Yeah, it's probably long enough. You
Right.
can maybe add a little drop shadow to it.
Oh, great idea. So in order to find a drop shadow, I'm going to go through some of the effects and presets. So let's go ahead and open that up, and we're going to see if we can find a drop shadow. So there's an effect here. I'll drag that out and I'll put it on the shape layer. And it's very subtle right now, but if I were to kind of increase its distance some, you can see that there's something behind it. See how that's there? So I'll update that to be pretty soft, and somewhere like that. Zoom in a little bit, move around, say, all right, that's probably it. So that's got a little bit of dimensionality to it. So we have some texture to it. All right, so we've got the bubble-ish look of it. Let's put some text on there. So as I was saying earlier, there's lots of different commands to, lots of different layers that we can work with. So if I come to layer and new, I can put a new text layer on. And this new text layer, I can put whatever we want. So let's say David Dorsey. And what is David today? Dorsey.
That's me.
That's you. What is he today? Space expert? Still a space
Space guy.
Excellent.
space guy. Space homie. I like it. Cool. So we have David, our space homie, and we're going to increase some of that size a little bit so it's a little bit larger. Now, if I put that on top of our bubble, will we see the text? Probably not. So we can put a drop shadow on it. That's not a bad idea. But I'm just going to change the color for now and just work with it from there. Just something easy here. Space homie. Now I can do other cool things with text here. I can actually kind of change the size of things. Change it a little bit, change the kerning, change the squash and stretch on it. Not necessary, but it's something else that you can edit inside of After Effects, as well as any of the other Adobe programs. Any questions right now? Where'd he go? All right, we're gonna try to just do that again.
Just redo.
I did. You can't redo. I don't know what happened. I don't know. All right. Then we'll try this again. Boy. Come on.
What?
We're just gonna go with that for it. Just the space guy.
Use the selection tool to get this. Click it from the top.
All right, we're good. We're in.
Useful shortcut when you're in text to just close it out is Command Return.
Command return?
Yeah, so
Ah,
that's useful. Because it's annoying when you click off.
yeah. I didn't know that they had changed that actually. Okay, that's how you get out of it. Cool. Learning something new. Cool. So we've got our space guy named David. And so here is where I'm going to kind of take what we've done so far and we'll pass it off to David to do some motion
Just make
graphics.
sure that's a title safe real quick.
Oh, actually, that's a good point. Who remembers title safe? And what's it for? You don't, I remember, what's your question then?
Oh, I was just gonna ask, can you go over again how you got how you got the outline of those circles to stop overlapping with each other?
To stop overlapping.
So, like, if
So there's a stroke on each of those shapes
Oh,
that you're
it makes
creating
sense.
in there, so you just want to take off the stroke. Or just
Yeah. So for example, if I open up these shape layers, I can open one of these ellipses and there's a stroke on it. And right now that stroke is here, but if I were just to delete that component, it actually would not be there anymore, so you don't have to worry about it. I think the stroke and the fill were both the same color, so that's why you didn't see any of it.
How would you delete that for all of them in the same? Like, is there a way to batch delete that for all of them, or would you have to go to
Yep.
every?
You see right up the top of the screen here where it says fill and stroke. To the right of stroke it says 2 pixels, so that's the size of your stroke right now. You just turn that down to 0 pixels.
For whenever you're drawing that shape again, for the future, but not for stuff that you've already put on the page.
Thank you.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just for creating new ones.
So the next thing that I'm going to do is now that I've got this kind of at a state where I'm like, all right, I'm happy with this. This is like the design that I'm going for, and I'm ready to start doing more with it. And I want to kind of compress these layers into like one layer and then do stuff on top of it. That's where we're going to talk about pre-composition. Now, title safe. Let's get back to that. So if I go here and I go to title safe and I say title safe turn on, what does that do? What does this mean? What do these lines represent that just showed up on the screen?
It's like the different ratios that people would watch it at home, so like you can safely put something there and most people are going to be able to see it.
Exactly. So like this stuff here between these two lines, it's like a 4:3 ratio or like a smaller like television format. You got these wider ones, more like a theater format or like 16:9. But if you're within here, this is our title safe and this would be our action safe. Now what's the difference between title and action?
So titles.
Titles are titles.
Action.
Action is movement, right? So you could have stuff that goes out to that action safe and it would kind of still exist, whereas the title stuff, you want to make sure it's definitely within the screen and will definitely be readable, so you push it in a little bit further. So, since these are a little bit out, don't want to move the whole footage, so I will deselect and I'll put this a little bit further in, so that it's definitely within. Make sense?
Could maybe differentiate his name and his title by like size or like font style,
Sure.
perhaps.
Any suggestions?
Maybe make it all alphabetic.
Yes.
Because design. And
Ooh.
yeah, there you go.
So
and
nice.
and then maybe say space guy, a little smaller. Yeah, a little smaller. 72. Yeah, that's great. 67 is awesome. And then maybe make that. That looks good. It's awesome.
All right. Do a little bit more like
Hierarchy.
yeah. There.
Or else
Someone.
they fight your eye. You know,
Okay.
you don't know
You
what to
who's in
read.
charge
Yeah,
here.
exactly.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. Thank you. So there's that. All right. So pre-composition. Don't put it underneath that. Pre-composition.
I just have a question about the title safe. So when it has like so I know there's like the two boxes on the outside, it's like action safe and title safe,
Mhm.
but the extra lines, because those are like the smaller screens, is that just like generally ignored with title safe? 'Cause
I
it's
wouldn't really be able to answer that specifically because I don't have enough experience.
You
But my
have to know
thought
your
is-
final product, right?
So if you're making something for YouTube, people are not probably going to be watching YouTube in a 4:3 aspect ratio. It's made for a setting where they might be watching that. It's something you should be aware of.
Yeah, that's what those lines are kind of doing for you. So for our case, I'm not paying attention to those other ones that are vertical. Cool. All right, pre-composition. Let's put this stuff all in one file so that we can kind of edit it and work with it. Now, since these are two different layers, I want to kind of compress them. So I'll right-click and I'll do pre-compose. Now what this does, if I move all these attributes to another layer, so I'll just say, we'll call this third, just to give it a name. So notice that it took those two and made it one. Now it's this kind of tan bar, and we have what's a new composition down here. It's called third. This was the one that we had started with, or that was the one that Nico had started making for us. But if I open just third, notice that it's nothing but the two layers that we made. So we can kind of compartmentalize and kind of piece this together in a whole and composite a series of different compositions all on top of each other to make different graphics and stuff like that. For example, if I were to hit the tab key, you'll see that there's a hierarchy of what's connected here. There's a whole panel that I could open up, but it can get really complicated and very confusing. But for right now, if I hit the tab key, you'll see that it's connected to this other composition because it's included inside of it.
Jeremy, why do we see that checkerboard pattern in the background when you bring the composition?
Sure, yeah, so when I was inside of this third, that checkerboard means that there's transparency there. So whatever is inside of this composition, those pixels that are this checkerboard will be coming through to another composition on top of it.
What if I followed along and it's all black instead of checkerboard?
Oh, well, if it's all black and you're not getting the checkerboard, there's a little toggle here next to the camera.
Can you do one more time condensing them into one?
Yeah, so basically what I did is I selected the layers and I right-click and hit pre-compose. Yep, and then I want to move all attributes to a new composition, so it will make a new composition with all of those layers that I had selected. Yeah.
So does this mean that like now you can't edit all the little circles, like they're just one thing?
No, they're still editable. They're in fact still inside of this shape layer, but now they're within a different composition. So if I open the contents, they're all still here, and I can change them and move them around, do whatever I want with them. But if I come back to this one, whatever I had changed, it would actually update up the line. It would change everything that's involved with that composition.
And for a comp that was as small as this, where there's only a few layers, utility of that seems like, why would I go through the hassle? But when you're in a file that has maybe 3 dozen to 70 layers, pre-comps become crucial.
All right, so we've got this here, and if I were to move it around, you'll see that it's just our lower third that moves around. So now that we've kind of got it isolated, let's pass it over to David to get some motion in here.
So, as we had sort of talked about, I'm just going to first discuss our goal for what we're going to be making with this motion graphic. So we had the spaceship that we made for our logo last week. So what we want to do is we're going to take that spaceship, and it's going to fly in from the left side of the screen, and as it flies in, it's going to be puffing out smoke behind it. And that's what's going to reveal these clouds of smoke and the title. And then we're just going to have the spaceship fly off the screen here, and then we can, mess around with how we're going to get rid of this title at the end. I'm going to make that up as we go. We'll see what looks good. So first things first, I'm just looking at this and thinking, if I have a rocket flying across revealing this is going to be a very large space that rocket's going to fill. So I'm just going to size this down a little bit. So you can double click on one of your compositions from within this window here, and it'll bring you into that pre-comp. So we have multiple tabs at the top of this panel here, so that's just the different compositions we're in. So from within this one, I'm going to take this shape layer, and I'm just going to size it down a little bit, and move it back down there.
Couldn't we just scale the pre-comp?
So we could scale the pre-comp, but since the text and the shape layers are wrapped together in that, it's going to squish the text also, and it's going to mess with the way that looks. So the text we have in here is, as we mentioned before, is vector, just like the shape layers are, but that doesn't mean it's going to scale all nice if we squish the entire pre-comp. Okay, so we can go back to our main composition here, and we see those changes. Maybe I'll make it a little bigger. Okay. So now we can bring in our spaceship. So we had, let's see, we have that in our assets here. Oh, that's the entire logo. Let's just steal the one we downloaded last week. And that one had a watermark on it. All right, we're gonna use the whole logo. That's fine. Can make that work.
What did you just do?
Okay, so before we had double clicked in order to bring footage into our project panel here, but you can also just drag something from Finder directly into that window. So we see this little Adobe Illustrator icon right here, and its type is vector art. So we can bring in the entire Adobe Illustrator project file that we had created last week and use that. And that's how we're going to be able to work with what we have here. So if I drag this into our composition, we see that it has the entire logo, and we only want the spaceship from that. So what we can do here is, let's see, open layer source, was that the one? No. We can flatten this into like shape layers, if I can just find the menu option for it. Convert to,
Create shapes from vector.
yeah, there it is. Okay, so now we can go into here and delete out the shapes that we don't need anymore. So this is a shape layer just like the one we saw before, and it basically used what it knows about that vector file to create different shapes using the same vector art to recreate this shape basically. So we can delete out these two little lines that we had here. We can delete out the moon. That's the ship. That's the ship. We can delete out the moon.
One nice thing
Alright.
to do for organization's sake, if you're going to be using converted outlines like that, is just go through and rename those groups once you figure out what they are, so you don't have to go through and re-click and find it 10
Right.
times.
So if I have the group selected here and I hit enter on my keyboard, that'll let me rename it. So this one is ship, this one is shine, and that helps with organization. Okay, so now we're going to position our spaceship to the starting position. So it's going to start just off screen to the left here. So there's a couple ways we could get that over there. We could, using the selection tool, we could click and drag this entire thing over and then rotate it from the corner. Maybe. Okay, no. Or we could use some keyboard shortcuts that'll allow us to edit it right from down within this menu. So some very useful keyboard shortcuts for After Effects are hitting S will let you mess with the scale of an object, which is its size.
Hitting P will allow you to mess with the position, so where it is on the screen, and X and Y are separate values there. R will let you mess with the rotation of the ship, which is what we're looking for in this case. And you can also have multiple of these available at a time by holding the Shift key and pressing the shortcuts for the ones you want to have open. So we have rotation here. I'll hold Shift and press P and S. So that just has all those open and available.
Now, David, how would I find those if I don't remember the shortcuts?
The other way to reveal those is just by clicking this little drop-down arrow here and going to our transform properties. So those are 3 of the commonly used transform properties. Another one that we're actually going to want to mess with in this point in time is the anchor point. So you see this little crosshairs in the center of our image here? Well, when we rotate our image, that's the point that it's going to be rotating around. But we want it to be centered on the ship because that's the center of our content. So we could use these numbers for anchor point to reposition them, or you can use the pan behind tool, which is just a tool basically used for moving the anchor point. So that tool is available up in this menu. The shortcut for that is Y. I'm just going to move our anchor point to the center of the ship here. All right, and so now we're ready to start messing around with animating this.
Just a quick question.
Yep.
Let's say I brought in my Illustrator file, but it came in really small. It said it was vector art, but when I scaled it up, it looked all chunky.
Did it? Do you want to talk about why that happened?
Yeah. So depending on how your Illustrator file is set up, it may be just a small area of the artboard, a small layer that you created the stuff on. Being vector art, it's irrelevant because you can scale it up and you use that stuff however you want. But when you bring it into After Effects, it will drop in your composition at a scale representative of that size. And it is a preview, a raster preview. Everything that's being displayed is being converted on the fly from vector to raster. If you notice that when you scale that up, that it's pixelated for some reason, there's a button in your stack there that looks like a star, and that's it's to the left of quality. It's just right a shy layer, and it's continuous rasterization or collapse transformations. And continuous rasterization will allow that vector to be updated as it's scaled. So if you're seeing what's supposed to be vector and you see it in your project panel as vector art, why is it showing up as pixelated? It's because the continuous rasterization option needs to be turned on for the layer.
Cool, thank you. All right, so let's get to animating this spaceship. So as I was moving the position around before, it just moved the entire ship, and it wasn't like flying from one place to another. I was just moving where on the screen it was. So we had talked a little bit in our Premiere demo last week, for those who were there, about keyframes. But I'm going to quickly go over what keyframes are again. So keyframes are basically the value of a property at a certain point in time. So when I'm at 0 on my timeline here, my playhead's at 0, if I wanted to make a keyframe for my position and then move forward in time and make another keyframe, it will basically linearly move the values between those in order to fill in the gaps between. So I'm going to show you a quick example of what that looks like. So we'll do that with the position for the spaceship we have here. So we see that we're started off to the left, and the way we create keyframes in After Effects is similar to Premiere. It's this little stopwatch icon to the left of our property. So right next to position, I'm going to click that stopwatch, and we see this little diamond-shaped thing with a blue fill on there. That means that we're currently on a place in our timeline for this property where there is a keyframe. So if I move a little bit forward, let's see, yeah, and I were to move my ship, I am on behind, thank you. And I were to move my ship, we see that it basically figures out the difference between those 2 points and over time will animate it from one point to another. And so basically what we're going to be doing today is just a mix of using a couple of these different properties in order to animate this. So if I get rid of that keyframe, let's say I want to have it go across the screen over the course of 3 seconds. So I'll go to 3 seconds in my timeline here, and I'm going to move the spaceship all the way across to where I want its ending position to be. And it's helpful like throughout the process of animating things like this to just play it back and
There's
oh no,
just so much of it.
stop it.
So much of
Stop
it.
it. Oh no, I got this.
So
Oh man, okay. Let's just turn this what is it? Audio off. Yeah, okay. We're good. Anyway. So it's good to just play this back and kind of get a feel of how fast it looks. And now wait, that's not happening over the course of 3 seconds like we had told it to. So this comes back to where we had talked about RAM preview before. So basically, this animation hadn't been loaded into the computer's memory yet, and so it's trying to figure it out while playing it back. That's something to be careful of, making sure that you are watching it at real time and not seeing a delayed version of it because it's not totally available for RAM preview yet. Because that will sometimes make you very thrown off and wondering why things suddenly feel slow. So this green line we see right at the top of our timeline here indicates things that have been loaded for RAM preview. So if you see green line above everywhere that you're trying to watch, you know that you're all set. Another thing that I want to do for playback here is I only want to see the first 3 seconds of it where this animation's happening, but we have this entire long timeline for this composition. So if I go to the end of where I want to be viewing and hit the N key on my keyboard, it moves this handle that was all the way at the end of the composition to the current position of the playhead. And that's basically just the region for playback that you're going to see. So as you watch, it's just going to loop through those 3 seconds as opposed to going through the entire composition. So now I can see, nope, that's still not loaded. Oh,
What if you just hide the video since there's so much more to be processed there?
yeah, we can do that. Well,
If you bring up the preview drop down over there, if you're in I think you have to be in standard for it to show your frame rate as it's playing. Yeah, so just play back and you should see your frame rate. It says it's playing real. No, there you go.
there it is. Yeah, so when you see these red numbers screaming at you, that means it's not playing in real time. So I guess this doesn't want to play in real time today. That's not fun.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I guess the computer is running a lot right now. Okay, well, we're just gonna roll with it, I guess. So this animation's happening over the course of 3 seconds. And now we said we want the clouds to appear from behind the spaceship as it flies across the screen. But right now, these clouds don't know anything about this spaceship. It's just kind of flying in front of them, and they aren't really interacting with each other at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to use what's called a mask. And so masks are basically, you can set sections of a layer in order to do things like show only that portion of the layer or to hide that portion of the layer are a couple of the main uses of masks. And so since we want to be animating revealing this, we're going to make a mask that's going to start off by basically living off to the left side of the screen here and not showing anything. And then we're going to animate our mask along with our spaceship so that it reveals things as the spaceship flies across. So we're going to make our mask using the pen tool, which is available up in this top menu here, or by using the G key on your keyboard. We're going to go to our third pre-comp right here. That's the layer that has our clouds and our text in it. And we're going to create just this big mask, but we want the front end of it to be the same size as the spaceship. So we can start off by clicking points within here, which is basically where it's going to begin revealing from. And then we want to just make a nice big window of space behind it. Okay, so we see it outlined in pink. I'll make the color a little more visible here. All right, now we have a nice blue mask. You can see that. So we have 5 points on this mask, or 6 points, sorry. And we can move each of these points separately over time. We can move the entire mask over time. There's a lot of options of things you can do with masks. So we want to be moving the entire mask over time. So we're going to begin animating this using a property of masks called mask path. So if you click the drop-down menu right next to mask 1 here, we see mask path. And since we're animating it, we need to set keyframes for it. So we're going to click the stopwatch here in order to set our keyframes. Now, one problem that I might run into here is that when I created that stopwatch, it made a new keyframe right where my playhead currently was. But I was right in the middle of this animation, of the spaceship animation, and so we have a random keyframe floating around in the middle. What we instead would want to do in this case would be to make keyframes at the start and end, because our mask is going to be moving the same speed as our spaceship. So we just need to set one keyframe, one right at the start, one right at the end, so that it can follow all the way through at the same speed. So we can just delete this keyframe here and make it back at the start. And now our spaceship is off to the left here, and our mask is all the way in the center. So we're going to move the mask path here. So we can move it using the arrow keys, and moving it by that moves it a little amount. You can hold shift and use the arrow keys to move it by a larger amount. So we see as we moved it across the page, it started hiding the parts of the cloud and text that weren't within the mask. That's because we have our mask type set to add here. If we were to change that to subtract, it would work the other way, and it would subtract the contents of the mask out of the composition, or out of the applied layer. So we want it set to add because that's how we're going to be revealing it. And we can continue moving this off screen. All right, and then we'll go forward to the first frame where we see our spaceship starting to come forward. All right, so oh, by the way, to frame forward and back in After Effects, you don't use the arrow keys, you use Command arrow key for frame forward and frame back. Okay, so we see this is the first frame where it's been revealed on the screen, so we can move our mask to just be overlapping with the back end of the spaceship here. So we just get these little bits of content being displayed. And then we can go to the very end once the spaceship is off screen, or even actually just once it's past the end of the clouds, really. And we can move our mask again. So we see that made a new keyframe down in our timeline here, indicated by the little diamond next to this property. And so if we play this back, we see that the spaceship is revealing the clouds and text here. So let's watch this back. It's a little slow, but this is what we've got. Does anybody have any suggestions for what we can do to make this more interesting, a little cooler, look a little better? Yeah?
You did like a fade
On the smoke? Yeah, so there's a couple ways we could fade it. So do you mean just like kind of fades in as the mask is moving across? Okay, so the way we can handle that is by using a property of the mask called mask feather. And so what that's going to do is it's going to basically create, so right now the mask feather is set to 0, and so there's 0 kind of variation off the line of the mask we have here. So the contents of the mask are set directly across that line. When we feather it, it's going to use a little bit of opacity along the sides there in order to, that's not even showing. No, it's showing a little bit. Yeah, so we see we're getting a little bit, I can't see it on the projector. You can see it on the screen. I'll turn the black background on. So we see that it's starting to get a little bit of feathering along the edges here. It's a little bit faded out. So when I set it to 216 pixels, that means it's basically expanding this mask for a size of 216 pixels, and then it's getting less opaque to full opacity along that line. So that's a little high for sure. We can tone that down to maybe, yeah, here looks pretty decent. We can turn that back off. So it's tough to see it on the projector, but we are using that feathered mask now. There's a little bit of a checkerboard coming in through the side of the mask here. But we also see a little problem that just created where our mask is going along this line, but we're kind of seeing some of the white starting to appear outside of that mask, and that's because the feathering goes in both directions. So it's going to reveal a little fade on the inside, but also the outside. So what we could do to fix that problem would basically just be repositioning our points of our mask in order to reduce that spill. So if we were to
take this point and move it in a little bit. Take this one and change the angle a little bit. We see that it's mostly like the fading is happening right in the area that would make sense coming out of the rocket. So that's a way that we could fix that problem.
Are there more options than mask feather and mask opacity?
Yes, there definitely are. Any ones in specific you are wondering?
No, just scroll down, just show the,
Oh, you mean properties for masks?
yeah, of the mask. Just
Oh yeah, so we can make the entire mask opaque using the mask opacity here. And basically that means that the area inside of this mask is going to be opaque at 41%. I have it set to right now, but since we have it set to add, everything outside of that is still going to be fully visible. So for example, if I wanted to take part of a shot and just fade out a little bit of it part way, I could make this mask set to subtract and use that. Oh, just kidding. That wasn't what I meant to do. Okay, never mind. I didn't say that. Okay.
scroll down.
Underneath
These are more
we
mask
have
options.
mask expansion. And so as we were talking about before, how there was a little bit of spill going off the outside of the mask here, mask expansion is one way that we can counteract that. Basically, you can set it to expand outside of the reach of this mask or inside it. So if we were to use a negative number of mask expansion, that would basically slightly alleviate our problem with the overflow there. So by setting it negative, it'll basically like take this line and if you can imagine like moving it in a little bit, that's the area that it'll be affecting, and so that flow from the outside is kind of being counteracted by the expansion. Cool. All right, is there anything else we want to do to this? Do we think it looks pretty cool? You think it looks perfect? You think this is ready for movies and I'll get rich? What's that? Oh, with the video? Okay, turn that back on.
Maybe render it out so you can see it real time. But
Yeah,
yeah,
we
how long it'll take if that's how long
Yeah,
it's
if
taking.
it's taking that long, we might be waiting here for minutes for that to render. But yeah, I can make this a little bit longer. You guys want the audio?
Yeah, of course, of course.
Of course,
Kind of question.
okay. Turn our audio back on here. Go. Go. The funny. There is so much of space. Yeah. So we can quickly turn that back on.
Computer's attempt at like reading it while doing it.
All right, so it's slowed down a little bit from what it'll actually look like, but there's our lower third. What do we think?
Maybe, I don't know, if it were moving faster, you'd expect some kind of motion blur to be on it.
Absolutely. So motion blur is actually really, really easy in After Effects. So if we collapse these panels so we can clean up what we're looking at a little bit, we saw before, Brad talked about this one right here, which was the collapse transformations, continuously rasterized for helping looking at our vector layers without seeing the jagged edges there. Another one of these useful little toggles over here is motion blur. We could throw a little bit of motion blur on our spaceship, and if it were moving quick enough for our eyes to perceive motion blur, it would be there.
No, it wouldn't. You gotta turn off for your comp. Yeah, it wasn't on yet.
Oh wait, what do I have to do?
It wasn't on in your view.
It might be.
Yeah,
Oh,
down.
down.
A little bit up.
A little bit up.
Right, a little bit to the right. Next to the worker bar.
That one. Oh, I totally knew about that. Yes. Okay. I haven't used it in a while. Sorry. All right. So basically, this enables motion blur to be seen within this composition. This switch was enabling it specifically for that one layer. So the movements within that layer have a motion blur on them. Do people know why we use motion blur? All right. So imagine my hand moving from left to right. You can kind of see a still image the entire way, right? You can make out my fingers individually. What about now? Can you see the individual lines of my fingers?
Yes.
No. So that's because it's basically moving too fast for our eyes to register what's happening in every single frame of that. So our eyes just kind of naturally see some motion blur. If we don't put motion blur on our animations, it's going to kind of look a little funny because there's this crisp, clean image. It's moving really fast, and that's not how our eyes are used to seeing things. So adding motion blur just makes things look a little bit more realistic in that respect.
Is that blur effect more pronounced in a camera than it is through the human eye?
Yeah, it is.
So definitely when you see footage, you expect to see that motion blur because cameras do accentuate that.
Yeah. So our eyes usually see faster than the frame rate that we're shooting things in cameras, and so it kind of compensates for that motion blur a little bit more, which is why sometimes if you have a quick motion in one of your shots and then you like pause and look at one frame of it, it might just be this big blurry sort of looking like your object thing. So
And does frame rate, like when you see differences between frame rate and footage too, a lot of that is how you're perceiving the motion blur in that footage. And so to pick, you can see clearly the difference between 24 and 60, often based on the motion blur that's captured in the footage.
yeah, that's part of why when you look at something that's shot at 60 frames per second, it doesn't quite look the same because there's less of that motion blur being captured by the camera. And so sometimes it can make things almost look a little less realistic.
Soap opera like or sports or something.
Yeah,
A
definitely.
good example of like motion blur that you guys probably can recognize is in Star Wars. When there's a lightsaber, you don't see just the lightsaber. It's like two sticks in between. You'll see like a really big like shape that almost looks like a square while it's being swung. It's the same thing here. You want the shape of the spaceship to be left slightly behind, like ever so incrementally right behind it, so it looks normal.
Saber flames.
Going to a saber tutorial right now.
David, do you know how to adjust the motion blur to make it more or less without
Um,
changing the transforming properties?
Off the top of my head, no, honestly. Do you?
Yeah, it's really inaccessible. I just didn't know if you knew off the top of your head. Do you know off the top of your head, Brad?
No, I've dug for it before.
It's
I've
very
looked it
hard to
up.
find.
Yeah.
You can if you want to.
It's possible.
Yeah, I think it's either in the composition settings, so Command K.
So there's wrong one. There's a couple ways you can access composition settings, which will change things like the length of our composition down on the timeline here. You can right-click on the composition from within that top menu here and select composition settings. Or what was the shortcut for it? Command K. Command K. So yeah, we see things like the size of the composition, the length of the composition.
I think it's in it.
So
Advanced,
under
yeah.
advanced,
Shutter angle, yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Motion blur.
so that would have to do with, okay, cool. Well, I learned something too today. All right. So it's 10 o'clock. That about brings us to our time here. So are there any questions you guys have jumping out of you about how we did anything today? Any conceptual type stuff? Any things you would like to learn how to do to make this look cooler or better?
Maybe you want to show how to update the path to something.
Yeah, we could do that real quick. Okay, so say I want my spaceship to fly all over the screen at a really funny, loopy kind of angle. We can basically create a path and then make the spaceship follow that path. So we're going to create that path by using the pen tool. So the pen tool before drew a mask on the layer we had selected, but when you don't have a layer selected, it draws a new shape. So we can use Bezier points to draw this path. We talked a little bit about Bezier points last time, but basically it was named after, I think his name's Pierre Bezier. He's a guy from a while back who knew a lot of stuff about math. And he basically found mathematical formulas for creating curves using points and handles is the way the system works. So if we click, we create a point, and if we click and drag, we see that it creates a curve with these two lines sticking off the second point we drew. So these are the handles. They basically affect the angle of the line coming into it and coming out of it. So we're going to use these in order to draw a path for our spaceship to follow. So we'll start right at the bottom here, and we'll have it fly upwards and downwards and upwards and downwards. So with these, it might take a lot of tinkering in order to make this path look realistic. This is actually probably going to look really terrible. I'm going to make less points. That should be a little better. And so we want our spaceship to fly along this path as it comes through the scene. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into this shape layer here. We're going to go to its contents, to the shape that we just created, into its path. And so we have this path value that we can actually just Command-C copy. And then we'll go down to our spaceship right here. We'll go to its position property. and we will paste that right on. And now as we play it back, we see, oh, let's just hide that shape we made. We see our spaceship is sort of following that path that we made, but it doesn't quite look right. And that's because the spaceship is doing this. It's not following the path realistically. It's just staying still and going up and down. So what we want to do to alleviate that is we're going to select our spaceship layer. We're going to go up to the layer menu, to transform, and auto orient. So what that's going to do is it's going to look at this path and it's basically going to decide how to change the rotation of the spaceship in order to follow along that path when we select orient along the path as that setting. So now we see the spaceship is turning. Whoa. Whoa. What did I just open here?
You hit 4 views.
4 views. Oh. Oh. That's interesting.
Two eyeballs.
Okay.
Now we're seeing some
So now we're seeing some motion blur. We're seeing the spaceship flying all over the place. Our mask is no longer animated along the same path as the spaceship, so the reveal looks a little bit weird. But we could go through and set keyframes for that mask along the way in order to make sure that it's following the spaceship correctly if we wanted to. But that's going to take a little while to do, and I'm not going to do that right now in front of everybody because we don't want to be sitting here until park closes. All right. Any other things we want to add?
I forgot to finish a thought earlier. So we said, what is the point of After Effects? After Effects, in addition to the effects that you can do, it's obviously a motion graphics editor. So this is what David and Jeremy were hitting on today was the motion graphics aspect and the animation, whereas you can also do live action. So it's like you can do real people kind of footage and stuff as well.